So I hope everybody's well. What I want to do today was to talk about this whole epidemic of loneliness that seems to be occurring, especially since we started coming out of the pandemic. I'm noticing, and it's something I've noticed in interviews, I've done meetings as well as just general conversations and live streams and just general interactions with people, that people are starting to feel more and more disconnected and much more lonely. It's almost like the solitude of the last year and a half is now getting to a point where it's becoming, quite uncomfortable. And people are feeling quite disconnected and quite lonely and quite separate from the whole, so to speak, really. So what I really want to do was talk about that in the video, and also talk about other things as well, because I'm noticing that this loneliness that's occurring, this epidemic of loneliness that's occurring, is affecting my work as well, because I'm now starting to find that more and more people seem to be appearing. And I'm under no delusion that somehow overnight everything I'm saying has become really, really popular. It's kind of showing me that what we're now seeing in this hyper-connected world, in this social media world that we have, that although we have a myriad of ways of communication, we do seem to be more and more disconnected, and it's creating this loneliness, and it's creating a lot of miscommunication as well, because whatever's posted or whatever's tweeted, blogged, or what have you has so many different interpretations. And it's about how we can get past that, because I had this beautiful conversation with a dear friend a couple of days ago, and he said something really simple, but I felt really profound. He goes, it was about a conflict that was going on, a bit of an argument, and he stated that what you can achieve sitting down face to face is so much more than what you can achieve over email or text. And yet what we're finding now is increasing numbers of people are using emails and text messages and other forms of communication to talk, and it's invariably creating misunderstanding, which then creates arguments, which then creates this separation, which then creates loneliness as people become more and more inward looking, but not in the right particular way. We then find as well with social media as well, if we click on a certain post, we tend to go into a complete tunnel, and we will then have posts that are similar to that brought up constantly as a way of keeping us on that particular platform. That then creates the situation then where we develop a very limited worldview. And how can we get around that? And the simple solution really, and the simple answer to that, is to actually start speaking to each other again. And it's a theme that has been following me for the last couple of months, and I feel that as simplistic as it is, it's probably the easiest, fastest, simplest way of us trying to get over this whole epidemic of loneliness that seems to be occurring. Because once upon a time it was really just elderly people who felt alone, but I found over the last couple of years that I'm starting to find a lot of younger people are feeling alone as well, and they're hooked into their devices, so they're not going out, they're not getting fresh air, they're not talking to people. So maybe what we could look to do is to go back to a simpler time of actually maybe going for a wander, maybe talking to people, maybe smiling to people. And it may feel uncomfortable at the beginning, but we may find that we will have some real interactions. Because I believe that communication should be total. It should be not one-dimensional. So for example, this video is one-dimensional, where I'm talking into a camera. I know that people are listening. I understand that obviously more and more people are listening, but I do also realize that this video is almost in a sense quite general, because it's taking into account whoever's going to be listening to this, but at the same time it's also kind of almost in a sense a calling card and almost an invitation as well to actually speak, to actually interact, and to actually meet. Because what we may find is a lot of misconceptions can be completely and utterly eradicated when we actually meet each other totally. And that's on a mental, a physical, and on a spiritual level. I had a beautiful conversation about energy yesterday, and what was really lovely was a young man literally turned around to me and goes, "Yes, our words can lie, but energy can't." And I was like, I'm in 100% agreement. And I think this over-reliance on this one-dimensional form of communication is creating these misunderstandings, which is creating this separation from the whole, which in that sense then is creating this loneliness. And if we can look to take maybe small baby steps in that direction of actually talking to each other, of actually trying to interact. I've started doing live meetings again, and it's incredible what's happening with people coming through the door. It's almost like people are starved of conversation and human interaction and touch and just literally just being with others. And if we can look to do that, if we can look to go back to those simpler times of talking to people, we may find that a lot of our fears and a lot of our misconceptions are easily reconciled. And all it requires is a conversation. Now, I understand that obviously over the last year, the narrative has been such that we have become increasingly suspicious of the other. I was watching a video the other day of a woman absolutely losing the plot on a flight because the gentleman next to her didn't have a vaccination card. And what I'm finding, without obviously going down this whole conspiratorial route, is that we are literally being pulled apart and going into this kind of isolationist phase where we supposedly have choice and we supposedly have a myriad of ways of communication, and yet there's even more miscommunication. And this can easily be solved by literally just sitting down and speaking and clearing things up. So I feel really this epidemic that we're seeing of loneliness now and disenfranchisement that's happening now can easily be resolved by simply starting to speak, by simply possibly smiling at your neighbor or just going for a walk and being in nature. There's a story I tell, and I think what I'd like to do is obviously tell that here, is I remember many years ago, my brother was walking past the house, and a lot of you have heard this story, and there was an old lady and he waved at her. And I asked him why he was waving her, and he was like, oh, well, it's just something I do, we wave at each other. So I started doing the same thing as well. And then sooner or later, a load of us started, everybody was walking with somebody. It's like, why are you doing that? Oh, I'm waving at this old lady. What was really interesting was that, months later, I'm walking past the house, the old lady's standing in her garden. And she actually said to me that her only interaction with the outside world at that time was because she'd had this operation, was these people going past her house and waving. And it's a story that's traveled with me, and it also demonstrates that sometimes the smallest of things can change somebody's day. I received a really lovely message this morning, just saying, Zahir, have a lovely day. And it just put a smile on my face. So I think if we can start reaching out, and if we're struggling to reach out, and if there's somebody struggling, reach out to them and speak to them, and just be there with them. Sometimes we don't even need a conversation. Sometimes just that presence of another person there can really be life-changing. And although what I'm saying sounds very simplistic, sometimes the most profound shifts can happen in simplicity. The most beautiful moments can be created in the simplest of acts. So speak to somebody, interact, put down the phone, maybe go for a walk and take in some fresh air. And what you may find is that we can go back to those times. We can go back to, there's a lot of talk about building back better, and I think that quite possibly building back better is a return to a much more simpler time of literally speaking to people. Because what we may find is that, yes, so much can come out. Like I said, I've increasingly become busier, on the online space, but I'm now finding I'm getting quite busier on the offline space as well. And of the two, as wonderful as this is, and it's great for getting out what needs to be spoken about, I feel that human interaction is still king. It's still the most important way of us recognizing who we truly are, recognizing the other, ending duality in our lives, ending this separation, and more importantly, ending this loneliness.